All right, today we're diving into the secret sauce of video games. It's that invisible thing that makes a game truly impossible to put down. And spoiler alert, it has nothing to do with fancy graphics or a blockbuster story. It's something much, much deeper. You know the feeling, right? You fire up this huge AAA game that looks absolutely stunning, but after an hour you're just kind of done with it. Then you pick up some simple little indie game, and bam, it's suddenly 3 in the morning. So what's the deal? What is that magic ingredient that actually hooks us? Well, the answer lies in a concept that game designers live and breathe. They call it core gameplay, and it is the absolute heart of everything. I love this quote because it's the perfect way to think about it. Your game's core gameplay really is its engine. You can have the slickest car design, the plushest leather seats, but if that engine is sputtering and weak, you're not going anywhere. It's exactly the same with a game. So what is it exactly? Simply put, it's the stuff you do over and over and over again. It's the moment-to-moment action, that perfect jump in Mario, lining up a headshot in a shooter, or clearing a line in Tetris. That one single action has to feel good all by itself. And you know game designers have a special name for this repetitive, satisfying cycle of actions. They call it the core loop. Let's look at a classic example from, say, an action RPG. You explore the world, you fight some enemies, you get awesome loot, and then you use that loot to upgrade your gear. And what does that let you do? Well, it lets you explore even tougher places to fight even bigger enemies for even better loot. See how that works? Every single step just flows perfectly into the next. It's so powerful. And hey, this isn't just for action games. Look at a farming sim like Stardew Valley. The loop is just as strong. Plant your crops, harvest them, sell the produce, and then use that cash to get better equipment for your farm. It's the same exact principle, just in a totally different wrapper. And you know, some of the biggest games out there will actually mix multiple core loops together, maybe switching from intense combat to tricky platforming, just to keep things fresh. Okay, so if the core loop is an engine, what are its parts? Let's pop the hood and take a look at the 5 things that really make a core loop sing. First up, you need clear objectives. From the second you start playing, you need to know what you're supposed to be doing. Whether it's get to the flag, kill the bad guy, or make the blocks disappear, the goal has to be crystal clear. If a player feels lost, they get bored. Fast. Second, and this one is absolutely massive, is challenge. Honestly, challenge is what separates a game from just watching a movie. It's that feeling of overcoming an obstacle that gives you that rush, that sense of, yes, I did it. A game without a real challenge is basically just a to-do list. Now, to support that challenge, you need a couple more things. You need intuitive controls and enough information. The controls have to feel like an extension of your own hands, right? You should be focused on the challenge, not trying to remember what button does what. And your screen needs to give you all the info you need to make smart decisions. Fighting the controller is never, ever fun. And the 5th, and maybe my favorite component, is something designers call juiciness. This is all about how the game feels. It's the chunky sound of landing a punch, the little shower of sparks when you pick up a coin, the screen shake when a giant monster stomps its foot. All these little details make every action feel satisfying and real. So a fun, juicy core loop gets you hooked, but what keeps you playing a game for weeks, months, or even years? Well, that brings us to a really important distinction, the difference between that core fun and the systems that are built for the long haul. Let's break it down. Your core gameplay. That's the engine we've been talking about. It's the pure minute-to-minute fun. Then you have what's called engagement gameplay. If the core is the engine, this is the road trip plan. It gives you long-term goals and destinations. These are all the rewards and systems built on top of the core loop to keep you coming back. So this is where you get things like skill trees, achievements, crazy loot systems, and long-term quests. They give you a reason to log in tomorrow and the day after that. But here's the key. All of these things exist to make the core loop more interesting. They don't replace it. And all of this brings us right back to our main point. Why that core loop is, without a doubt, the single most important part of any video game. This quote just says it all, doesn't it? You can have the most epic story, the most gorgeous art style, the deepest crafting system in the world. But if the simple act of playing your game, moment to moment, isn't fun, people are just going to leave. End of story. So the single most important takeaway here is this. A great game's core gameplay has to be fun all by itself. You have to enjoy doing it, even without the promise of a shiny new helmet or another cutscene. The simple act of playing has to be its own reward. That is the foundation that everything else is built on. And that kind of leaves us with a final question to chew on. This whole idea of a core loop. It doesn't just apply to video games. Think about it. Think about your job, your hobbies, maybe your fitness routine. What's that fundamental, repeatable cycle that keeps you going, that keeps you motivated? What's your engine of fun? All right, let's get right into it. Today we're digging into the very soul of video games. We're going to talk about the one thing that when you really think about it, separates them from every other form of media out there, and why that single thing is the engine that makes them so powerful. So what is it? What really separates a game from, say, a movie or a book? Well, a book tells you a story. A movie shows you one. But a game turns to you and says, okay, you do it. It puts an obstacle in your path and gives you the tools to figure out how to get past it. And this quote just hits the nail on the head. Look, art and story are often a huge part of the experience, for sure. But the actual architecture, the very bones of a game, is built on challenge. That's the engine that really drives our engagement. So here's our game plan. First, we'll look at what makes a game, then we'll get into the science of being in the zone, that amazing feeling of flow. After that, we'll see how games pace themselves, how they make our choices actually matter, and then we'll end by looking ahead to the future of play. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. The defining element of a game is an obstacle, a problem you have to solve, and, this is the most important part, the very real possibility that you might fail. Without that threat of failure, you don't really have a game. You have what you might call an interactive experience. This whole idea taps into something really fundamental about us. As humans, we're kind of wired to test our limits, to see what we're made of. And games give us this incredible safe space to play out this really powerful loop. First, there's frustration, right? You hit a wall. Then, your brain kicks into problem-solving mode. And finally, you get that incredible feeling of triumph when you break through. And all of this leads to the most critical role that challenge plays in game design. It's all about guiding the player into a psychological state that you have absolutely felt before, even if you didn't have a name for it. That state is called flow. It was popularized by the psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, and it's basically that magical feeling of being in the zone. You're so completely locked into what you're doing that the outside world, your worries, even time itself just kind of melts away. For a game designer, getting a player into this state is the absolute holy grail. And this chart shows you exactly how it works. See, flow isn't some random thing. It happens right here, in this specific channel. As your skill as a player goes up, the challenge has to go up right along with it. The whole job of a designer is to keep you right in that perfect sweet spot, the flow zone. So what happens when you fall out of that zone? Well, if the challenge is way too high for your current skill level, you get pushed up here into anxiety and frustration. The game just feels unfair. But if the challenge is too low, you drop down into boredom. Nothing's happening. Either way, the magic is broken, and you're probably going to put the controller down. And here's what makes it so tricky for designers. That flow zone is different for everybody. A hardcore player needs a much steeper difficulty curve to stay engaged, but a total novice, they need a much gentler slope. This is exactly why a one-size-fits-all difficulty setting is so incredibly hard to get right. But let's be real, you can't stay in that high-tension, high-skill state forever. I mean, you'd be exhausted. The best games totally get this, and they manage their challenge over time using a very specific kind of rhythm. First, you have the periods of high tension. These are the moments that test everything you've learned up to that point. Yeah, think of a crazy boss battle or a huge firefight where the stakes are super high, your focus is absolute, and your skills are being pushed right to the limit. This is the peak. This is the tense. But just as important, if not more so, are the moments that come right after, the release. These are the moments you get to breathe. You're exploring a town, maybe solving a light puzzle, or just taking in the story. These periods stop you from getting burned out. They let you feel good about what you just accomplished and build you up for whatever's next. It's a very deliberate pattern of tense and release. So when you look at the difficulty over an entire game, it isn't just a straight line going up and up. It's much more like a staircase. Each major task, each step gets harder as you go, but when you get to the next step, it starts just a little bit easier, giving you a chance to get your footing before the next big climb. It's a design that makes progress feel fair and really satisfying. Now, a really well-designed challenge does more than just test your reflexes. It makes you think. It forces you to make decisions that actually feel like they matter. A great way designers do this is with something called triangularity. Basically, it's giving you a meaningful choice. So, do you take the safe, easy path for a small but guaranteed reward? Or do you risk it all on that super dangerous shortcut that could give you a massive payoff? It makes you strategize, and it makes your actions feel important. And of course, the stakes get even higher when there's the threat of punishment. The perfect example is a game like Dark Souls, where if you die, you might lose all the resources you just spent an hour collecting. That consequence makes every single move, every decision feel incredibly weighty, and it ensures that when you do finally succeed, that success feels absolutely monumental because you earned it. So, okay, we've seen how challenge is the psychological engine, it's what creates flow, it's the pacemaker of a game, and it's what gives our choices meaning. But to wrap this all up, let's look to the future and ask a pretty interesting question. This quote is from Genova Chen, who actually designed a game called Flow to explore these ideas. And he suggests that maybe, just maybe, the future of games could evolve beyond this framework of conflict and challenge. Can a game still give you that deep immersive experience without an obstacle to overcome? We're already seeing some experiments in this space. It's a fascinating question, and one the next generation of creators will have to answer. Thanks for joining me.
So when you think about what makes a game truly great, what comes to mind? You're probably thinking amazing graphics, right? Or maybe super tight controls, a killer story. But what about the one thing that connects you to all of it? Today, we're talking about the unsung hero of game design, the camera.
Just think about your all-time favorite game for a second. Got it? Okay. Now, imagine playing it with a completely different camera. A crazy, fast-paced shooter, but from a top-down view. Or a sprawling strategy game, but in first person. The whole experience would just fall apart, wouldn't it? That's the power of the camera.
And hey, that's not just my opinion. As this quote spells out, game designers see this as a make or break decision. And why is that? Well, because this single choice has a domino effect on everything, from the core mechanics all the way down to the player's emotional connection to the game.
It's so important to get this. The camera isn't just some passive window you're looking through. No way. It's an active guide. It's literally dictating your situational awareness, your ability to make tactical calls, and even how invested you feel in the world and the character you're playing.
So let's kick things off with the most direct perspective out there, the one that puts you right inside the character's head.
In first person, you are the character. Simple as that. You're seeing what they see from their point of view. It's the ultimate you are there experience, which makes it incredibly powerful for certain kinds of games.
And right away, we see the classic trade-off. On one hand, you get this absolutely incredible immersion. It's even cost-effective for developers, since they don't have to build and animate a complex player model. But the downside is real. It can literally make some players dizzy, it's notoriously bad for precise platforming, and it's a lot harder to build a connection with a protagonist you never actually get to see. So it's really no surprise that FPP is the undisputed king of shooters and immersive action games. I mean, when aiming is everything, seen through the character's eyes is just the most intuitive way to go. But if you're trying to tell a deep, character-focused story, probably not the best tool for the job. But what if connecting with that character is just as important as the action itself? For that, we need a whole different approach. And that, my friends, is where the third-person perspective comes in.
Here, the camera acts like your companion, following your character around, usually from behind or over the shoulder. This gives you a great view of both your avatar and the world they're in, which opens up a ton of new gameplay possibilities.
The strengths here are pretty obvious. You have much better situational awareness, which is perfect for complex combat or stealth. And you actually get to see your character react to the world, which is huge for building empathy. The major downside? Oh, it's a nightmare to program. Developers have to build these super complex collision systems just to stop the camera from getting stuck on walls or clipping through a tree, a problem that plagued so many early 3D games.
And this is exactly why third person is the standard for those big action-adventure and narrative-driven games. When you need to see your character climb, fight, vault over things, and express emotion, this is the camera that lets you do it all.
Okay, so we've looked at being in the action, but what if the whole point of the game is to command the action from above?
This is what I call the general's view, the God's eye perspective. The focus here isn't on a single character's personal experience, but on the entire battlefield, the whole city, or the whole dungeon layout.
The core idea here is a big trade-off.
You sacrifice that up-close, personal immersion for a wealth of tactical information. This perspective lets you see the entire field, plan your moves, and position your units just right. But it does mean you're a bit detached from the action. You're observing rather than directly experiencing it.
This makes it the no-brainer choice for strategy and management games. Any game where positioning and resources are more important than one character's moment-to-moment journey is going to feel right at home with this camera.
Now let's simplify things. Let's flatten the world for a second and talk about cameras that are designed not for immersion or strategy, but for pure mechanical clarity.
So in the 2D world, you've really got two main options. There's a scrolling camera that follows the action, which is perfect for platformers where you need to see what's coming. Or you have a fixed camera that shows you the whole board at once. It's why games like Tetris are so easy to read. You never have to worry about what the camera is doing.
And here's the thing you have to understand. For these games, that predictability is a massive strength, not a weakness. When every single pixel of a jump matters, you do not want the camera doing anything fancy. You need it to be perfectly clear, stable, and readable. End of story.
Of course, modern games are rarely so black and white. The best designs often blend these different camera types together to solve specific problems and create those truly unforgettable moments.
I mean, just take the lock-on system. It's an absolutely brilliant solution. It takes a normal third-person camera and, with just one button press, turns it into an automatic tracking camera focused on a single enemy. This lets the player focus on the fight, not on wrestling with the camera controls. And then you have cinematographic cameras, which is when the designer completely takes control away from you. They do this to create a very specific feeling, to frame a breathtaking view perfectly, to create a sense of dread by limiting your vision, or to subtly guide you toward where you need to go next. It's pure storytelling, just with a camera lens.
So after looking at all these different types, what are the big takeaways? How do designers actually make the right choice?
Well, it really boils down to a few core ideas. First off, keep it simple. The player should be fighting the game's challenges, not the camera. Second, you have to know your platform. A camera that feels great on a TV 10 feet away will feel totally claustrophobic on a PC monitor that's right in front of your face. And finally, when in doubt, study the greats. See what works in games that are trying to pull off a similar experience. So the next time you boot up a game, just take a moment and really notice the camera. It's not just showing you the game, it's actively shaping your entire experience. Ask yourself, what is the camera telling me to see? And maybe even more importantly, what is it intentionally keeping just out of my view?
All right, let's get right into it. We're going to be exploring one of the most critical but honestly often overlooked parts of game design, the controls. You know, they're kind of this invisible language between you and the game. When they're bad, oh, you feel it instantly. But when they're good, they just disappear.
I mean, we've all been there, right? You're playing a game and it just feels clumsy, awkward. You're trying to do something simple, but the controls are actively fighting you. That feeling, that friction, it just yanks you right out of the experience and reminds you that, oh yeah, I'm just sitting here pushing buttons. And that's because the control interface is so important. Think of it as this bridge, right? It's both a physical and a mental bridge that connects what a player wants to do with what actually happens in the world you've worked so hard to build. So here's the crucial thing about that bridge. It cannot be an afterthought. You can't just tack it on at the very end of development. It has to be designed and built right from day one, hand in hand with your core gameplay. This right here is basically rule number one. If your main game mechanic needs like a 5-button combo just to do a basic move, the problem isn't your control scheme. It's the mechanic itself. Seriously, the gameplay has to serve the controls, not the other way around. Simplicity has to win out. So how do we start building this bridge the right way? Well, it all begins with ergonomics. We're not just trying to find a spot for every action, we're actually designing for the player's hands and thinking about what they're going to be doing thousands of times. And it really just boils down to this. You want to minimize fatigue. You want to minimize discomfort. And the way you do that is by making the actions they perform over and over and over again, like running or jumping or shooting, the absolute easiest and most comfortable things to do. This process is just perfect. You're basically creating a little hierarchy of your game's actions. The most frequent, the most critical stuff, that's your core loop. It gets the prime real estate on the controller, the buttons your thumbs are already resting on. Then the less urgent things like opening a map or checking your inventory, yeah, those can be moved to a button that's a little harder to reach. And this is a big one. Your main attack, your jump, these need to feel instant, effortless, a single satisfying button press. You can totally save the more complex inputs, like holding down a modifier button
or doing a double tap for secondary actions that you're not doing under intense pressure.
Okay, this leads us perfectly into our next key idea, simplicity, and just sticking to standards. Because building on that foundation of ergonomics, you'll find that the most intuitive controls are usually the ones players already know by heart.
Look, simplicity is everything. Every single new button or command you add just puts more of a mental load on the player. Take a game like Machinarium, for example. It's just brilliant because it lets players do everything with a single mouse click. That makes it so accessible and lets you focus on the actual puzzles, not on figuring out the interface.
You have to remember, players don't come to your game as a blank slate. They bring years and years of muscle memory from other games. So if you decide to make the X button jump when every other game in that genre uses the A button, you're just creating friction for no reason. Leaning on these standards isn't lazy. It's smart design that respects your player.
And then there's this, which is just pure gold if you can pull it off. It's all about tapping into a player's natural instincts. What would someone try to do to perform an action? Tilting a phone to steer a car is the perfect example. The control just mirrors the real-world action, and it feels completely instinctive from the second you pick it up.
But of course, all these principles don't exist in a vacuum. A fantastic control scheme for a PC with a mouse and keyboard is probably going to be a total disaster on a mobile touchscreen. You absolutely have to design for the hardware.
The platform you choose to develop for literally dictates the technology you have to work with. That's why it has to be one of the very first decisions you lock down. You just can't take a console control scheme and slap a bunch of virtual buttons on a mobile screen. It just almost never works.
Right, because each platform has its own language. On mobile, you're thinking simple one-finger taps and swipes with really big touch targets. On PC, the mouse is king for precision. But you know what's interesting? Adding controller support can actually force you to create a cleaner, more focused design. And in VR, the goal is to pretty much get rid of buttons entirely and rely on natural hand motions.
So, when you bring all of this together, the ergonomics, the simplicity, the platform-aware design, what's the ultimate objective? What are we really trying to achieve here? This is the magic moment. It's when a player doesn't say, I pressed the red button to make my character throw a hook. They just say, I threw my hook. They stop seeing the interface, and they start seeing themselves in the game world. That's when you know you've nailed it.
And this, really, is the absolute pinnacle of control design. It's when that bridge between the player and the game world becomes so seamless, so intuitive, that it just becomes completely transparent. The player isn't playing the game anymore, they are in the game. So think about that for a second. What's a game you've played where everything just clicked, where you never once had to think about the controller in your hands? That feeling, that pure, effortless flow, that's not an accident. That is the mark of deliberate, thoughtful, and truly brilliant design.
You know, there's this secret conversation games are constantly having with you. And no, I'm not talking about dialogue or cutscenes. I'm talking about this hidden language that teaches you, that guides you, and honestly, makes every little action just feel so satisfying. Think about it. You fire up a brand new game, and somehow you just figure it out. You learn the rules, you master the systems, and you do it all without ever touching a manual. So, how in the world does that actually happen?
Well, it's because the game is constantly talking to you. Not with words, but through this back-and-forth conversation. And that conversation is what we call feedback. It's really the heart of how you learn and play pretty much any game. Okay, so let's get into it. What exactly is this feedback? And why is it so absolutely fundamental to the whole experience of playing a game?
At its core, feedback is the game's reaction to every single thing you do. You press a button, something happens. It's how you learn what works and what doesn't. It turns gameplay from just, mashing buttons into this amazing process of discovery and experimentation.
Right, so for this secret language to actually work, it can't be random. Nope. It has to follow a few super critical rules that game designers are completely obsessed with.
So what makes feedback really click? Well, it boils down to 3 fundamental principles. You get these right and the game just feels right. It feels intuitive. So let's break them down.
First up, immediacy. For our brains to actually link our action with what happens on screen, the feedback has to happen within this ridiculously tiny window. We're talking 200 to 400 milliseconds. Any longer than that, and our brain just doesn't make the connection. The only big exception here is really in strategy games, where you might make a decision and see the result minutes later, but that's intentional.
And man, this quote just nails it. Think about a crosswalk button that gives you no light, no sound, nothing. You just stand there wondering, did it work? You press it again and again. That annoying, uncertain feeling is exactly what good games are designed to avoid.
Next up, proportionality. The reaction you get should match how well you did. The classic example is Angry Birds. You line up that perfect shot, and boom, massive, satisfying destruction everywhere. But a bad shot, it just kind of bounces off with a sad little puff. The feedback is perfectly proportional to your skill. And finally, there's clarity. The feedback has to be crystal clear, and this is just as important for when you mess up. You know that classic error sound in Tetris when a piece won't fit? That instantly tells you, nope, can't go there. No confusion, you just immediately try something else.
Okay, so we've got the rules down. Now let's talk about the art of making that feedback feel, well, good. This is where we get into all the sensory flair that makes a game feel amazing to interact with. In the industry, they call this juiciness. Now let's be clear, juiciness isn't the feedback itself. It's more like the flavor of the feedback. It's not changing the rules of the game. It's just adding all these little layers of sensory satisfaction that make every interaction feel punchy and rewarding. And this juiciness comes at you from all angles. You've got screen shake, damage numbers popping up, awesome impact sounds, the controller rumbling in your hands. They all work together to make your actions feel real and important. Visuals are especially key in mobile games because, so many people play with the sound off.
And this right here, this shows what might be the most powerful method of all, natural consequences. You see the direct, logical result of what you did. You put a patch on the pipe and the water spray immediately shrinks. It's intuitive, it's immersive, and it is just so satisfying.
But hey, feedback isn't just about those tiny moment-to-moment actions. It also works on a much bigger scale, shaping the entire game through something called systemic feedback loops.
You've basically got two main types. You've got positive feedback loops, which kind of snowball and amplify things, and then you have negative feedback loops, which work to stabilize the game and keep things balanced.
So a positive loop can give you that awesome feeling of growing power, like leveling up in an RPG makes you stronger, which helps you level up even faster. But it can also go the other way, creating a downward spiral where one mistake makes it way easier to make another one.
Negative loops are the fix for that. You see them all the time as catch-up mechanics in racing games, or think about how in Half-Life you'd find more health packs when you were badly hurt. These loops are absolutely crucial for keeping a game from getting boring or frustrating by making sure no one gets left too far behind.
So, why? Why does all of this matter so much? What's the ultimate goal of every sound, every screen shake, every single system we've just talked about?
It's all about getting you, the player, into a state of flow. You know that feeling, right? It's that magical zone where you are so completely absorbed in what you're doing that the rest of the world just melts away and you lose all track of time. And here's the kicker. You simply cannot get into that state of flow without constant, clear feedback. It's the little voice guiding you, letting you know you're on the right track, and telling you that, yes, you can totally handle this challenge.
And that's really the magic of it all. This whole system of communication is what takes something that could be a frustrating guessing game and turns it into this deeply rewarding experience. It's what gives you that incredible sense of accomplishment when you finally figure something out all by yourself.
So next time you're playing your favorite game, I want you to really pay attention. Listen for that hidden conversation, the clicks, the flashes, the rumbles. What is the game telling you? And how is that secret language making you feel?
You know that feeling when you're playing a game and everything just clicks? I mean, every jump, every shot, every little interaction just feels so satisfying. Well, that feeling actually has a name. And today, we're going to dive into the secret sauce that makes games feel absolutely amazing to play.
You may not see it, but you can feel it. I mean, that just nails what we're talking about, doesn't it? The stuff that creates that amazing game feel is so often invisible. It's got nothing to do with super high-res graphics. It's all about that gut feeling, that visceral sensation that your actions actually matter in the game world.
So this really gets to the core problem a ton of developers run into. You can build a game that's technically perfect, The code is clean, the rules are balanced, but it just feels kind of mute and lifeless. The real magic, the art of it all, is figuring out how to transform something that's just functionally correct into an experience that feels satisfyingly alive.
And that magic, that's what we call game juice, or sometimes polish.
The best way to think about it is like this. It's a layer of sensory feedback, a reward system. It doesn't actually change the rules of the game. What you do stays the same, but it completely changes how it feels when you do it. It's really the difference between a game just telling you something happened and making you feel it happen.
You know, the game designer Jesse Schell has just the perfect analogy for this. He says a juicy game is like a ripe peach. Just one little bite or one little interaction in the game, and you get this continuous flow of delicious, rewarding feedback. It's that constant, satisfying cascade of motion and response that just keeps you hooked.
And really, the whole philosophy behind this comes down to one simple principle: show, don't tell. Instead of popping up some text to explain the rules or to tell you, hey, good job, a juicy game shows you. It uses this whole symphony of sight, sound, and motion to let you know what's going on. It communicates everything through pure sensory feedback.
Okay, so that all sounds great, right? But how do developers actually do this? Well, let's break it down into what we can call the 4 main flavors of juice. And we'll start with the most obvious one: visual effects.
We're talking about all that eye candy that emphasizes an action. You know, sparks flying when a ball bounces, smoke and debris from an explosion, a little kick of dust when your character lands, even just flashing the screen when you take damage, or adding light trails to something moving fast. What's so powerful about this stuff is how simple it is, but how huge the effect is. It's instant feedback that tells you, yep, what you just did had an impact. That little puff of dust makes your character feel like they have real weight.
All right, next up, our second flavor, animation and physics. This is all about making the game world feel tangible, physical, and like it's actually reacting to you being there.
There are a few key techniques here, and they're basically classic animation tricks applied to games. You've got squash and stretch, which is when an object's shape distorts on impact. It gives things weight and personality. Then there are environmental reactions, grass rippling, trees bending. The world responds to you. It makes you feel like you're really there. But the one I really want to zoom in on is called hit pause.
This is such a simple but absolutely brilliant idea. You literally freeze the entire game just for a handful of frames. We're talking milliseconds here, right at the moment of a heavy impact. And what it does is it adds this incredible sense of weight and drama. It gives your brain just enough time to process, whoa, that was a big hit. All right, let's get into our third flavor, immersive audio. People always say audio is like 50% of the experience in a movie. Well, in games, that is 100% true. It is absolutely crucial. I mean, think about it. You can have the most gorgeous visuals imaginable, but if your actions are met with silence or just a wimpy little sound effect, the whole thing feels hollow. It feels flat. A good, satisfying pop, a heavy bass thud, or a cool musical flourish, that's immediate positive reinforcement that tells your brain, heck yeah, you did that, and it was awesome. And check this out. This is wild. There was a study where they had 2 groups play the exact same game. The graphics were identical for both. The only difference, one group got much better audio. And the result? The group with the better audio actually rated the game's graphics more highly. How crazy is that? It just shows that good sound makes the entire experience feel more believable, more impactful, more real. And that brings us to our fourth and final flavor. And this one is really cool, the dynamic camera. This is all about using the camera itself as a tool to create that feel. It's subtle, but man, is it effective. So instead of just showing you an explosion on screen, a little screen shake makes you feel the shockwave ripple through the world. Or when you fire a heavy weapon, a sharp camera kick adds that sense of recoil and power. These little camera movements are basically simulating physical forces acting on you, the player, and it just makes everything feel so much more powerful and visceral.
Okay, so there we have it. Our 4 flavors: visual effects, animation, audio, and the camera. But, and this is a big but, you can't just throw all this stuff into a game randomly. To do this right, to apply juice effectively, you need to have a purpose. You need restraint.
The absolute key here is that the juice has to match the theme, the emotion you're trying to create. I mean, look at this. For a fast-paced shooter where you want the player to feel powerful, yeah, bring on the massive explosions and heavy screen shake. But if you're making a tense, story-driven mystery game, that same stuff would totally wreck the atmosphere. You'd want subtle audio cues, atmospheric feedback instead. The juice has to serve the experience, not get in its way.
So let's boil all this down to 3 simple rules for good juicing. Number 1, it always has to reinforce the core mechanics. It's got to be a direct response to what the player is doing. Number 2, match the theme. Like we just said, the effects have to fit the emotional tone. And number 3, and this is a big one, don't overdo it.
If every single tiny action creates a massive explosion and shakes the screen, it all just becomes distracting visual noise. It loses all its meaning.
So what's the big takeaway here? Well, the goal is to give you a new lens. That's a term Jesse Schell uses. A new way to see and appreciate the incredible, often invisible artistry that goes into making a game feel just right. You can actually start to break down why some games feel so good to play.
So here's my challenge to you. The next time you're playing your favorite game, I want you to try looking at it through this lens of juiciness. When you do something, anything, stop and ask yourself, okay, how many different ways is the game rewarding me for that one action? Is there a particle effect? Is there a sound? Did the character's animation change? Did the camera move? And could they have added even more? Once you start looking for it, you'll start seeing this invisible art of game feel absolutely everywhere.
Have you ever wondered what gives certain video games that incredible staying power? You know, that magic that keeps you completely hooked for hours and hours? Well, a huge part of that secret sauce is a really clever design philosophy we can call multiplicity. So let's break it down.
Oh, you definitely know this feeling. You're deep into a game you absolutely love. The main action is a total blast. But then, after you've done it for the 10th or 20th or even 100th time, that magic just starts to wear off. That one awesome move suddenly starts to feel like a bit of a chore.
In the world of game design, this has a name. They call it the repetition rut. And honestly, it's one of the biggest challenges a designer faces. How do you keep a game feeling fresh and exciting from beginning to end? To figure that out, we first have to talk about something called the core gameplay loop. Now, this is basically the fundamental rhythm of the game. So, for example, think about a big role-playing game. You explore an area, you fight some enemies, and then you use what you got to upgrade your gear. That cycle, explore, fight, upgrade, that's the heartbeat of the entire experience.
And what actually makes up that loop? Well, that's where the core mechanics come in. These are the moment-to-moment things you're doing. So, in a shooter, the loop might be about capturing an objective, but the core mechanics are the actual aiming, the shooting, the reloading. They're the essential building blocks of everything.
Okay, so how do you break out of that repetition rut we were talking about? The solution is as simple as it is powerful. You add another gameplay loop. The best designers out there know that sometimes the key to keeping things fresh is multiplicity. And the benefits here are just huge. I mean, it breaks up the monotony for sure. That's the obvious one. But it's also an amazing tool for managing the game's pacing. Think about it. After a super intense action sequence, switching to a quiet puzzle lets you just breathe. It also tests different parts of your skills, your tactical brain 1 minute and your platforming precision the next. But you know what the biggest win is? It all comes down to giving the player more choice.
And this quote right here just nails it. When you empower players to decide how they want to solve a problem, that's a sign of truly great design. It respects their intelligence, and it makes every victory feel personal and earned.
So, how do designers actually make this happen? Well, it turns out there are two main strategies for weaving multiple kinds of gameplay into one single, solid experience.
Let's break these down. On one hand, you've got what are called independent gameplays. Think of this like switching tools from a toolbox. The game basically says, okay, for this part, you're going to use your combat tools. And then later, all right, now it's time for the platforming tools. On the other hand, you have combined gameplays. This is way more like a Swiss Army knife. You've got all your tools available at once, and it's up to you to decide how and in what combination you're going to use them. A perfect example of that independent strategy is a game like God of War. One moment, you are in this absolutely visceral, up-close and personal combat. The next, the story shifts gears, and you're in a completely separate puzzle or traversal section. You're never trying to fight a giant monster while also trying to balance on a narrow beam. But then you have the combined strategy, like in a game like Deus Ex. Here, a room full of guards isn't just a combat puzzle, it's a question. Do you try to sneak past everyone, go in guns blazing, or maybe you hack a nearby computer and turn their own security systems against them? The choice and all the tools are completely yours.
But, and this is a really big but, you can't just smash different game styles together and hope for the best. This is a really powerful technique, but it comes with a pretty strict set of rules.
So any designer who tries this really needs to follow 3 core principles. First, narrative coherence. The different gameplays have to make sense in the game's world. Second, you have to avoid drastic mismatches. We'll get to that in a sec. And finally, a really practical one, you have to be realistic about your project's scope.
And this quote just brilliantly illustrates that second rule. I mean,
Trying to combine two types of gameplay that are just worlds apart can be a total disaster. It gives you this weird tonal whiplash, and it ends up appealing to two completely different kinds of players, which means you might not satisfy either of them. The mechanics have to feel like they actually belong in the same universe.
This brings us to that really crucial point about scope. Look, building one great gameplay loop is already incredibly hard. Building 2 or 3 or more, that makes things exponentially more complex. So, for smaller teams, or if you're making your first game, the best advice is often to just focus all of your energy on making a single mechanic absolutely perfect.
So, when it's all said and done, what's the ultimate goal here? Because when it's done right, adding multiple gameplays isn't just about giving the player more stuff to do.
It's really about creating depth. It transforms a game from a simple, one-note activity into this dynamic, multi-layered system. One that challenges you in different ways, rewards your creativity, and ultimately just gives you a much richer and more memorable experience. And that leaves us with a fascinating final thought to chew on. We've seen designers blend stealth and action, puzzles and combat, but as this trend continues, what's next? What new, totally unexpected combinations are going to pop up and create game genres and experiences we can't even imagine right now? The possibilities are pretty much endless.
Have you ever had this amazing idea for a game, but then you just got stuck? You weren't sure where to even begin? Yeah, that's a super common feeling. Well, today, we're going to cut right through all that confusion and focus on the one thing that really truly matters first, designing a rock-solid game system.
You know, it's so easy to get distracted by the story, the art, or how you're going to sell it. But the real foundation of any great game, it isn't all the flashy stuff. It's something way more fundamental. And that's exactly what we're going to build together, right now.
So here's our game plan. First, we'll get really clear on the difference between a game system and a game concept. Then, we'll dig into the 5 core features that every single game needs, no exceptions. We'll watch it all click into place with a real example, and then, at the end, I'm going to give you a powerful checklist to help you guide your own designs.
Okay, first things first, and this next point is absolutely crucial. Think about it like this. You can have the most beautifully designed car in the world, but if the engine is busted, it's not going anywhere, right? Well, today, we are building that engine.
Let's be super clear here. Your game system is the pure, raw gameplay. It's the rules, the mechanics, it's the engine. The game concept, that's the shiny paint job, the cool story, the theme, all that marketing stuff. A great concept with a broken system is just a recipe for disaster. So we're focusing on building that powerful engine first.
All right, you ready for the big secret? It doesn't matter if we're talking about a simple mobile game or a massive open-world RPG. Every great game is built on the exact same 5 foundational pillars. If you can master these, you've got the blueprint for any game you can imagine.
These are the 5 essential building blocks. Think of them as the DNA of your game. You've got the core gameplay, the camera, the controls, feedback, and something we call juiciness. Let's break down what each one actually is and why it's so critical. Theory's great and all, but honestly, the best way to learn is to just get our hands dirty. So, let's design a game system from the ground up, right here, right now. And for our theme, let's go with a fast-paced, downhill mountain biking game.
First up, the core gameplay. This is the absolute heart of the experience, the main challenge we're giving the player. For our biking game, it's all going to be about this constant, thrilling balancing act between raw speed and precise control.
Now check out how these really simple ideas create a super compelling challenge. The objective is clear: get to the finish line first. But the risk, either going too fast and crashing or going too slow and getting stuck, creates this constant tension. And the player only has 2 tools, brakes and pedals, to deal with all these obstacles. That constant tug of war, that is the fun.
Next up, the camera. Now, this isn't just some technical thing you decide on later. The camera fundamentally shapes how the player sees and feels the entire game world.
For our game, a classic side-scrolling camera is going to be perfect. It keeps the action really clear, the player is always in focus, and that is so important for a game that's all about timing and quick reflexes. It's simple, but it's incredibly effective.
All right, so we've got our challenge and we've got our view. But how does the player actually do anything? Let's talk about the controls.
Now, since we're picturing this as a mobile game, simplicity is everything. I mean, everything.
So we'll use just two big, simple buttons on the screen, one to hit the brakes and slow down, and one to pedal and get more speed. That's it. It's intuitive, it's accessible, and it connects directly to the core gameplay. So the player is controlling the bike, but how does a game talk back to the player? How do they feel that rush of speed or the danger of an obstacle right in front of them? Well, that's where feedback comes in. We're going to use a whole mix of visual and audio cues. The faster you go, the more dust you'll see kicking up from the tires. The sound of the wind rushing past gets louder. Even the rider's animation will change. They'll lean forward to get more aerodynamic. And of course, you'll see other riders on screen, so you always know exactly where you are in the race.
And finally, we get to my favorite part, juiciness. This is the secret sauce. These are all the little, satisfying details that don't actually change the rules of the game, but they make playing it feel incredibly responsive and just alive. Here's a perfect example for our bike game. When the player successfully lands a big jump, they don't just, land. No! They let out a shout, they pull off a cool little midair trick. It's this tiny, celebratory moment that gives a huge emotional payoff for doing something right. That, right there, is juiciness.
Okay, so let's say you've gone through and defined these 5 features for your own game idea. That's awesome. But how do you know if your choices are any good? How can you tell if what you've designed is actually going to be fun? This right here is where most tutorials and books just kind of leave you hanging.
And that's exactly why you need a way to self-assess your work. You need a tool to stress test your own ideas, to poke holes in your design and find the weak spots before you pour tons of time and money into actually building the thing. A good checklist forces you to ask the hard questions. Is my core challenge obvious from the start? Can a new player figure out the controls in less than 30 seconds? Does the feedback I'm giving actually help the player make better decisions? This kind of structured thinking is how you find and fix problems early on.
And really, the whole point of defining your game system is to get to this next, super important step, building a prototype. Prototyping is where you finally get to test if your carefully designed system is actually fun to play. It's where your ideas finally meet reality.
So there you have it, the 5 pillars of any great game system and a structured way to actually test your own ideas. You now have the blueprint. The only question left is, what game will you build?
What makes a game stick with you? I mean, really stick. We've all had that one game that just pulls us in for hundreds, maybe even thousands of hours. It becomes this little ritual in our lives. So what is that secret ingredient? What's the magic that keeps us coming back for more? Well, that's what we're going to break down today. But let's be real. We've all had the total opposite experience, haven't we? You find a game, you fall in love with it, you're telling all your friends they have to play it, and then one day, you just stop. Poof, gone. You don't even really make a conscious choice to quit. You just never launch it again. Why does that happen? Well, it almost always comes down to one of 2 feelings, boredom or frustration. If a game gets too easy, you start to feel like your time is being wasted. But if it gets too hard, you just feel stuck, like you're hitting a brick wall. Either way, you end up in the same place. You quit. And that right there is the fundamental puzzle that every single game designer has to solve. So let's start there. Let's really dig into the psychology behind this, this delicate balancing act. What's actually happening in our heads when we decide, yep, I'm sticking with this, or nah, I'm done? It turns out, designers and psychologists actually have a name for that perfect middle ground. They call it the flow channel. You can think of it like this perfect zone where the game's challenge is rising right alongside your own skill. You're not bored, you're not frustrated, you're just in it, completely lost in the game. And this quote just nails it. The psychologist who really pioneered this whole idea, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, he put it perfectly. Real enjoyment isn't about just coasting along. It's about being on that razor's edge, where you're challenged just enough to see totally focused and absorbed. Okay, so to understand how designers keep us in that flow state, we've got to split the idea of fun into 2 different categories. First, you've got what's called core gameplay. This is the fun that happens second to second. It's a satisfying crunch of a headshot, the feeling of a perfectly timed jump, that aha moment when you solve a puzzle. It's what makes a game fun to actually play. But here's the thing. That immediate fun, that core gameplay, it's not enough to keep you hooked for a year. For that, you need something bigger. You need engagement gameplay. Think of this as the master blueprint. It's the whole structure built around the core fun that gives you long-term goals and keeps you motivated for the long, long haul. So how do designers actually build this engagement structure? Well, it all starts with the first and maybe most important pillar, giving us a real sense of progress and doling out those sweet, sweet rewards that go with it. So, at the very heart of almost every game meant to be played for a long time is this foundational idea, player progression. This is your journey. It's the whole system of leveling up, getting better gear, unlocking new skills. It gives you a tangible sense of growth and a powerful reason to keep pushing forward. And this progression usually follows a very simple but incredibly powerful cycle. Step 1, you overcome some kind of challenge. Step 2, you earn something for doing it, experience points, cool loot, whatever. And step 3, you use that stuff to get stronger, which gets you ready for the next challenge. It's a loop, and it's ridiculously good at keeping us hooked. But, just watching a progress bar slowly fill up, that's not really enough, is it? The journey itself has to feel satisfying on an emotional level. And that's where the next key pillar, rewards, enters the picture. A really well-designed reward is doing a ton of work. It's giving you clear feedback that, yep, you did the thing. It gives you that little jolt of satisfaction that makes the victory feel awesome. And most importantly, it gives you the motivation to say, okay, what's next? It's basically the fuel that keeps that progression loop running. Okay, so we've got a satisfying loop of progressing and getting rewards. But how do designers keep that loop from getting too easy or too frustrating? And maybe even trickier, how do they stop it from just getting old and boring? This brings us to our third pillar, the difficulty curve. Now, this isn't random. It's a very carefully crafted plan for how a game's challenge is going to ramp up over time. Its entire purpose is to keep you right in the middle of that flow channel we were talking about earlier. And one really popular and effective way to do this is called the stair-step curve. The idea is that the challenge gets harder and harder within a level, but then the next level starts off just a little bit easier again. It gives you a moment to catch your breath. Think about a classic Super Mario game, right? World 2-1 is always going to be a little easier than World 1-4 was. It lets you get used to the new mechanics before they really start testing you. It's a brilliant way to prevent player burnout. But here's the thing. Even with a perfectly balanced difficulty curve, there is an enemy that is absolutely unavoidable: repetition. If you do anything enough times, it eventually becomes stale. Designers call this content fatigue. And for games that want to last for years, it is a massive, massive problem. So what's the solution? Well, that brings us to our fourth and final pillar, renewal. This is the secret weapon of huge, ongoing games like Fortnite or World of Warcraft. They are in a state of constant evolution, always adding new stuff, new challenges, new limited time events. This constant stream of novelty makes sure that there's always a reason to log back in. So there you have it. We have these 4 big ideas: progression, rewards, difficulty, and renewal. So how do they all fit together to create a game that you just can't put down? Let's look at them all together. Player progression gives you that long-term journey. Rewards make the journey feel great. The difficulty curve keeps it perfectly balanced so you stay engaged, and renewal makes sure the whole thing never gets old. And the key takeaway, the most important thing to remember, is that none of these works on its own. They absolutely have to be woven together into one single, seamless system. And when designers get that right, they create this incredibly powerful engine that can keep us invested for months, sometimes even years, long after the initial thrill of the core gameplay has faded. And all of this leaves us with a really fascinating question to chew on. As these engagement systems get more and more sophisticated, are they actually making games better and more rewarding? Or are they just getting better at hacking our brains to keep us playing? It's something to think about the next time you find yourself clicking one more term at 2 in the morning. You know that feeling, right? You sit down to play a game for, say, 20 minutes, and then you look up and suddenly 3 hours have just vanished. Well, that's not an accident. It's architecture. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain and look at the architect's blueprint, the carefully designed system of rewards that is engineered to keep you playing. So here's our game plan. We'll start by defining what game rewards really are. Then we'll explore how they're paced out over time. That's the reward timeline. We'll also see how they're tailored for different kinds of players, peek into the designer's toolkit, and finally dig into the core psychology that makes it all so incredibly fun. So let's start with that big million-dollar question. Why are some games so sticky, so compelling, that they're almost impossible to put down? It goes way beyond just saying, oh, they're fun. The secret is a very deliberate, very clever psychological design that's built entirely around rewards, all meant to keep you invested. Which brings us right to our first section. What exactly are we talking about when we say game rewards? Let's peel back those layers and find out what really makes these systems tick. Okay, at their core, game rewards are just features with a super specific purpose, to give you valuable objectives that keep you hooked for the long haul. You can think of them like a trail of breadcrumbs, always leading you just a little bit deeper into the world of the game. And I think this quote just nails it. The core gameplay, the running, the jumping, the shooting, that's what gets you in the door. But the rewards, that's what makes you want to stay. They're the sweeteners, the things that add that crucial layer of depth and value to the whole experience. But, it's not just about what rewards you get, it's maybe even more about when you get them. Designers think about this on a timeline, and it's all about perfectly pacing your engagement. They break this down into 3 key horizons: the short term, the medium term, and the long term. Each one serves a totally different psychological purpose, and when you put them all together, they create this really powerful, continuous loop of motivation. All right, short-term rewards. These are all about that instant gratification, the little sparks of joy that make the moment-to-moment gameplay feel really satisfying. And here's the clever part. They're also how a game teaches you the rules without you even realizing you're being taught. Think about stuff like collecting coins, grabbing a power-up that makes you feel invincible for like 10 seconds, or stumbling upon a hidden zone. Even a simple sound effect or a flash of text that says, "Great," is a short-term reward reinforcing that, yeah, you're doing it right. Okay, then we've got medium-term rewards. These take a little more effort. These are the goals that make you say, all right, I'll come back tomorrow to finish this. They are the absolute backbone of player retention, turning a one-time play into a regular habit. You know that feeling of finally beating a super tough level and it opens up a whole new world to explore? That's a medium-term reward. Or the never-ending quest to beat your own high score? These are the hooks that keep you coming back over days and weeks. And then you have the mountaintop, the long-term rewards. These are the huge, monumental achievements, the marathon goals that are designed to give the most dedicated players a really profound sense of mastery and completion. We are talking about finishing the entire story, finding every last hidden artifact, unlocking a secret game mode that completely changes how you play. These are the ultimate payoffs for all those hours of dedication. But of course, we're all different. What motivates me isn't necessarily what motivates you. A great game designer knows this, and they build a reward system that offers a little something for everyone. And this is fascinating because it breaks down our motivations so clearly. See if you can spot yourself. Are you an explorer who just lives for uncovering secrets? Maybe you're a killer, driven by competition and high scores. Or a socializer who's there for the community and teamwork. Or an achiever who just wants to master the game and collect all of the medals. A truly great game has rewards for every single one of these types. So how do designers actually build these complex systems? Well, they have a really deep toolkit of reward types, and they use them based on some pretty powerful psychological principles. And this toolkit is incredibly diverse. A reward can be as simple as praise, a little congratulatory sound, or as complex as a new power. It can be a gateway to a new level, a beautiful animation or spectacle, the ability to customize your character through expression, or just some good old-fashioned resources like in-game cash. But just having all these tools isn't enough. Designers lean on 2 really powerful psychological rules of thumb to make sure their rewards have the biggest possible impact. The first rule is all about fighting boredom. See, we get used to things really quickly. It's called player acclimation. A 10-point reward is super exciting at first, but an hour later, it's no big deal. So the solution? Escalating value. As you progress, the rewards have to get bigger and better and shinier to keep feeling special. The second rule is all about being unpredictable. If you got a reward every 10 minutes on the dot, it would just become expected, right? Boring. That's fixed delivery. But with variable delivery, the reward pops up randomly. You never know when it's coming, and that feels like a delightful surprise every single time, which keeps our brains completely hooked. And all of this, the timelines, the player types, the delivery schedules, it all leads to one place. It's all engineered to produce one very specific thing, an optimal psychological experience. And that experience has a name. It's called flow. Flow is that magical state where you are so completely immersed that the world around you just disappears. It happens when the game's challenge perfectly matches your skill. If it's too easy, you get bored. Too hard, you get anxious. The whole reward system is a key tool designers use to keep you right in that perfect focus zone of flow. And this quote just sums it all up perfectly. That simple loop, seeing a goal, working to achieve it, and then getting a reward, that's the engine that keeps us glued to the screen. It powers these flow states, and it's what makes great games feel so deeply satisfying. So the next time you're playing your favorite game and you lose all track of time, just take a second to look a little closer. Now that you've seen the blueprint, what are you going to notice? Can you spot the short-term hits, the medium-term hooks, and the long-term goals all working together to keep you exactly where the designer wants you? Have you ever been obsessed with a game? I mean, played it for 100 hours, absolutely loved it, and then one day, poof, you just stopped? Well, today we're digging into why even the absolute best games get old and the clever art designers use to fight back and keep us completely hooked. So, here's our game plan. First, we're going to identify the #1 enemy of long-term fun. Then we'll dive into the design philosophy built to take it down. We'll break apart the 3 big tools designers have, see how to use them right, and finally, we'll reveal the ultimate shortcut to making a game feel fresh pretty much forever. Let's get into it. All right, first things first. Let's talk about the big problem that every single game runs into, no matter how awesome it is. It seems like a simple question, right? But the answer gets to the very soul of game design. Just think for a second about a game you love. What is the one thing you do in it over and over and over again? That single action, that's the key. You know, designers have a name for that. They call it the core gameplay loop. It's that cycle of actions that makes a game fun to begin with. You know, jumping on Goombas, matching 3 candies, landing that perfect headshot. It's why we start playing. But here's the crazy part. It's also the reason we eventually stop. And this quote just nails it. It doesn't matter how perfect or satisfying that core loop is. If you just do it again and again, the challenge fades. You master it. And once that happens, boredom kicks in. The fun killer has officially arrived. So, if that core loop is both the source of all the fun and the cause of boredom, what's a designer to do? We don't throw it out. You build on top of it. You add a new layer called engagement gameplay. And this right here is such a crucial distinction. The best way to think about it is like this. Core gameplay is the initial spark. It's got to be fun on its own, right? But engagement gameplay, that's the fuel you keep adding to the fire, the thing that keeps it roaring for days, months, maybe even years. And the single best tool for that is something our sources called the renewal of the player's experience. I know it's a bit of a fancy term, but the idea is actually super simple. You strategically add variations to that core gameplay to make the old challenge feel brand new and exciting all over again. But this isn't about just, randomly throwing new stuff at the player. Good renewal is a deliberate strategy, and it focuses on 3 core parts of any game. Think of these as the 3 big levers a designer can pull to change things up. You can change what the player is trying to do, you can change what's getting in their way, or you can change what they have to solve the problem. Let's see what that actually looks like. Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. Look at Candy Crush. The core action, matching gems, never, ever changes. But the objective is different on almost every level. One minute you're clearing jelly, the next you're dropping ingredients. Then you've got Angry Birds. Your tools, the birds, are mostly the same, but the obstacles, those pig fortresses, are always different, forcing you to find a new angle. And in Clash Royale, the goal is always destroy the towers, but they're constantly adding new cards, new tools, which completely changes how you play the game. Okay, so we get what renewal is and the levers that make it work. But how do the pros actually do it effectively? Let's get into some best practices. Believe it or not, designers use checklists just like this one to figure out if a game has what it takes to last. Does it keep adding new stuff in these key areas? Because if a game is just giving you new levels with the same old goals, the same old enemies, and the same old weapons, that's a huge red flag that players are going to get bored fast. This right here is probably one of the biggest takeaways. Renewal has to be about mechanics, about what you do, not just about what you see. A new coat of paint is nice, for sure, but it's not going to keep anyone playing long-term. So good renewal, it's all about giving players new strategic choices. A new enemy that forces you to use a different tactic, or a new ability that opens up a totally new way to play. That's what keeps our brains fired up. And on the flip side, bad renewal is just a reskin. If that new ice level plays exactly like the old fire level, well, you haven't really renewed anything. You've just changed the wallpaper. And the really smart designers, they don't treat this as an afterthought. They plan for renewal from day one. They build their core systems to be flexible, always asking, can we easily add new goals, new roadblocks, and new toys for the player down the line? It's all about building for the long haul. Now, building all this variety, all these new levels and tools, that takes a ton of time and a ton of money. But what if there was a shortcut, a way to generate almost infinite novelty with just one feature? Well, there is. Yep, it's other people. By putting players up against other human beings, designers tap into the most complex, unpredictable, and creative system on the entire planet, the human brain. And this quote just says it all. You can play on the same map with the same character 1,000 times, but no two matches against other people will ever be exactly alike. Think about it. An AI opponent, no matter how clever it is basically running on a script. Eventually, you can learn its patterns. But a human opponent? Oh man, they can be brilliant, they can be clumsy, they can try the weirdest strategies you've ever seen, and they adapt in ways a machine just can't. Humans provide a source of newness that is, for all practical purposes, infinite. Your own players become the content. They are constantly creating new puzzles and new challenges for each other to solve. It is the ultimate renewal engine. So let's wrap this all up. What did we learn? 1. Repetition, even fun repetition, will eventually kill the fun. 2. The best defense is to constantly renew the experience by pulling those 3 levers: objectives, obstacles, and tools. 3. New ways to play will always be just a new look. And finally, the most powerful renewal tool of all, it's us. And I'll leave you with this question to chew on. Think about a game you used to adore but just don't play anymore. Was it actually a bad game? Or did it just forget to keep things fresh? What one new objective, one new obstacle, or one new tool could make you fall in love with it all over again? Think about it. Thanks for tuning in.
You know that feeling, right? When a game just clicks. Every single challenge is tough, but it's totally fair. You're so sucked in that hours just vanish. Well, that's not magic. It's actually by design. It's a carefully constructed experience. So the big question is, how do designers pull that off? How do they build that perfect balance of difficulty?
Okay, so here's our game plan. We're going to start by walking what I call the engagement tightrope. Then we'll get into the psychology of flow. That's the magic zone. After that, we'll look at the actual blueprint designers use, the difficulty curve, and the tuning knobs they twist and turn. We'll also check out how they build games for every kind of player. And finally, we'll pull back the curtain on the unseen architect who puts it all together.
All right, first step, let's talk about the big one. This is the core problem every single game designer has to solve: keeping you, the player, hooked.
Seriously, think about it for a second. What makes you put down the controller and just walk away? I mean, really quit a game. It almost always comes down to one of 2 feelings.
So on one hand, you've got boredom. The game's just not keeping up with you. You've gotten better, but the challenges haven't. It's too easy, and honestly, it feels like a total waste of time. But on the other hand, you've got frustration. This is when the challenge ramps up way too fast. It's just too hard, and you feel completely overwhelmed, maybe even a little anxious. See the problem? Both of these paths lead to the exact same place. You quit the game. Designers have to walk this incredibly fine line right down the middle.
So, what's it like when they get that balance just right? Well, there's actually a name for that feeling, and it is the holy grail of game design. It's all about getting the player into a state of flow.
Flow. I'm sure you've felt this before. It's that amazing mental state where you are just completely in it. The outside world totally disappears, you lose all track of time, and you are just 100% absorbed in what you're doing. It's often called the zone, and let me tell you, games are one of the best ways on the planet to create it.
And this graph, this shows you the science behind it perfectly. So look, that line at the bottom, the horizontal one, that's your skill, and it's getting better over time. The one going up, the vertical one, that's the game's challenge. Now, to keep you in that sweet spot, that flow channel right there in the middle, the challenge has to go up in almost perfect sync with your own ability. If it dips too low, you're bored. If it shoots up too high, you're anxious. It's all about staying in that channel.
Hey, look, this isn't just some made-up term for gaming. It comes from some serious psychological research. The psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, and I hope I'm saying that right, he pioneered this whole theory. He said, flow is a feeling of complete and energized focus in an activity, with a high level of enjoyment and fulfillment. He figured out that this is the state where we humans feel and perform our absolute best.
Okay,
But how on earth do designers keep you in that flow state for, a 40-hour game? They don't just wing it. They use a really detailed plan, a blueprint. And in game design, that blueprint is called the difficulty curve.
Now, when you hear difficulty curve, you might picture this straight, brutal line just going up and up and up. But think about it. Just hitting players with harder and harder challenges with no break? That's not fun, it's just exhausting.
Instead, the best games are paced more like an emotional roller coaster. They create this rhythm of tension and release. So designers will ramp up the action to really test you, but right after, they give you these moments to breathe, to recover, and to actually enjoy the skills you've learned before the next big climb. It's often called a stair-step approach.
And making a great curve comes down to a few key things. First, the baseline. You gotta start easy, right? You need to give players a chance to learn the mechanics without feeling overwhelmed. Then you've got the target audience. The steepness of that curve totally depends on who the game is for. A super casual game is going to have a much flatter, gentler curve than something like Dark Souls, which is built for hardcore players from the ground up. And finally, pacing. It's all about balancing those high-intensity moments with periods of recovery.
Okay, so we've got the blueprint, the curve. But what are the actual bricks and mortar? What are the tools designers use to build it? Let's talk about the tuning knobs they can twist to adjust the difficulty from one moment to the next. Difficulty isn't just one thing. It's actually a whole bunch of different variables they can play with. They can mess with the physical obstacles, throwing more enemies at you, making traps deadlier, or even shrinking the time limit. They can also tweak the raw power levels, adjusting things like your health and damage versus the enemy's health and damage. And one of the coolest ones, they can actually make the AI smarter. The enemies don't just get tougher, they get more clever, using better tactics as you get deeper into the game.
But here's the real puzzle. Every single player is different. What I find easy, you might find impossible. So how do you make one game that feels just right for everyone?
Well, they've got a few tricks up their sleeve. The most common one is static settings. You pick easy, normal, or hard right at the beginning. You have all the control. Then there's dynamic difficulty, or DDA. This is where the game secretly adjusts things behind the scenes based on how you're playing. You have no direct control over it. There's also rubber banding, which you see all the time in racing games like Mario Kart. It basically slows down the person in first and speeds up the people in last to keep things competitive. And finally, some games use player-controlled difficulty, where they give you the choice. Take the safe, low-reward path, or risk it all on a dangerous path for a way better prize.
Let's dig into that dynamic difficulty adjustment for a sec, because it's really fascinating. The game is literally watching how you play. A classic example is Resident Evil 4. If you're just breezing through, killing everything, the game might start throwing more aggressive enemies your way. But if you keep dying over and over in one spot, it might silently remove a few enemies from the next room, all without you ever noticing. The goal is to keep you challenged, but not stuck. But, it's a really delicate balance. As the game designer Bracky's pointed out, there's a danger here, because you're kind of negatively affecting the player for being good. If the game gets harder every single time you succeed, it can feel like you're being punished for playing well. The best DDA systems are the ones you never even notice.
Okay, let's pull all these threads together. When you look at all these pieces, the psychology, the curves, the variables, you start to realize something. Game difficulty isn't random. It is an act of architecture.
The game designer is like an unseen architect of your fun. They start with a detailed blueprint. That's the difficulty curve. Then they use carefully chosen materials, things like enemy AI, player stats, and level design. And with those, they construct this entire experience, this structure that is engineered with one primary goal, to guide you perfectly into that amazing state of flow.
So the next time you're playing a game and it just feels perfect, when you're totally in the zone, the challenge is just right, and you're at the top of your game, just for a second, pause. You might just be able to see the work of that architect hiding behind the curtain, who built that entire amazing experience just for you.
Have you ever looked at your playtime on a game and thought, wow, where did 1,000 hours of my life go? It's not just about how fun the game is to play moment to moment. Oh, no. There's a powerful, almost invisible system at work, and it's called player progression. It's what architects your entire journey, and today we're going to pull back the curtain on it.
So really, what is the secret sauce that makes a game last that long?
It all boils down to a masterfully designed sense of advancement. It's that feeling that you're always getting stronger, always striving for that next thing, and always being rewarded for the time you put in. You can think of player progression as the literal backbone of the game's entire experience. It's the system that holds everything up, guiding you from being a total newbie to an absolute pro, carefully turning up the heat with new challenges while dangling shiny new rewards just within your reach. So let's start where every player does, the very beginning. You know, that first hour of gameplay is make or break. Game designers know they have a tiny window to get their hooks in you, and they have to do it fast. This is why the early game feels so good. You're leveling up constantly, upgrades are super cheap, and you're getting a steady stream of new toys and abilities to play with. It's basically a fire hose of positive reinforcement, all designed to make you fall in love with the core gameplay loop. And this quote right here, it perfectly captures the philosophy. It's not really about the destination, is it? The climb itself has to be fun. From the very first step, the journey is the reward. Okay, so the game's got you, you're hooked. Now you're in the mid-game, and this is where things start to get really interesting. The system shifts. It's not just about getting loot anymore, it's about making choices that actually matter. This is pretty much the golden rule of progression design. You want to know why? Because autonomy is everything. When you get to decide how your character grows and develops, you become invested on a whole other level. That character isn't just an avatar anymore, it's yours. And Ghost of Tsushima is such a brilliant example of this. Are you going to be this silent ghost, striking from the shadows? Cool. Pour your technique points into evasion skills. Or maybe you're the honorable samurai, facing your enemies head-on with steel and courage. Then you'll want to invest in deflection. It's the same game, but you get to create two totally different playstyles, all driven by your choices. And listen, this isn't just some illusion of choice. It's backed up by a gigantic arsenal of weapons, items, and abilities. All that variety, that's the fuel for the whole progression engine. It ensures there's always something new, something cool, something you just have to unlock next. When you boil it all down, giving you these choices transforms the game into your personal adventure. It lets you play the way you want to play. It makes you curious to try a different build on a second playthrough. And it solidifies that deep, personal connection to your character. All right, let's talk about the long game. We've been hooked early, and we've made our meaningful choices in the middle. Now we enter the marathon phase. This is the part of the game that's engineered to keep you playing for months, or maybe even years. And this is where the math gets kind of wild. Those fast, cheap upgrades from the beginning, yeah, they're long gone. To keep you chasing that carrot on a stick for the long haul, the cost of everything starts to skyrocket. What was once a quick sprint becomes an epic climb. Just look at World of Tanks. When you're starting out, a new tank might cost you a few thousand credits. No big deal, it feels great. You're building out your garage, making progress, and feeling powerful. But then, look at this. A top-tier tank costs almost 2.5 million credits. That's more than a 600-fold increase. That incredible scaling is what turns that initial burst of fun into a massive long-term goal. Now, designers have a word for this intentional slowdown. They call it friction. And this friction, this grind, isn't an accident. It's often where the game's business model comes into play, offering you a chance to pay real money to reduce that friction and speed things up. It's a direct link between game design and revenue. So what happens when that climb gets a little too steep or you hit a wall you just can't seem to get past? Well, a really smart progression system has a plan for that. It's designed to motivate everybody, not just the top-tier players who win all the time. And the secret is rewarding effort, not just success. Think about it. If you try something and fail and walk away with absolutely nothing, that's just frustrating. You're probably going to quit. But if you get even a little something for your trouble, well, now you have a reason to get back up and try again. A lot of games even do this behind the scenes. They use these clever systems that basically watch how you play. If you're struggling a lot, the game might subtly make enemies a little weaker or give you a bit more health. It's all designed to keep you in that perfect sweet spot, the flow state, where things are challenging but not impossible. The game Towerlands is a great, simple example. If you win a battle, you get a massive reward. You feel awesome and accomplished. But even if you lose, you still get a small, steady drip of resources. Failure is never a total waste of time. It's just a smaller step forward. So when you put all these pieces together, the psychology, the economics, the gameplay, how do designers actually build these things from the ground up? Well, it turns out there are a couple of key best practices they tend to follow. First off, keep it simple. If the player has no idea what they're supposed to do to get stronger, the whole system just falls apart. And second, and this is a big one, make the choices permanent. If you can just constantly refund your points and change your build, those choices lose their weight. It also messes with the game's economy, which is often tied to that permanence. But, for every rule, there's always an exception. For those super hardcore competitive games, you actually want players to be able to reverse their choices. The top players need that flexibility to experiment with every single build and counter strategy to stay on top of the meta. In that case, it's a feature, not a flaw. And that really brings it all home. Player progression is this incredible two-sided coin. On one side, it's the engine for your personal journey, giving you that amazing sense of accomplishment. And on the other, it's a foundational pillar for the game's long-term survival as a business. So I'll leave you with this to chew on. When a system is this perfectly engineered to hold our attention, to keep us coming back day after day, and sometimes to encourage us to spend money, are we just experiencing masterful game design, or have we walked into a beautifully crafted, very enjoyable trap? It's something to think about next time you tell yourself, just one more level.
All right, let's just jump right into it because we've all been there, right? It's super late, you are so tired, you know you should probably go to sleep, but you hear yourself saying it, just one more round, just one more level. Well, today we're going to pull back the curtain and look at the psychological engine that makes us do that.
I mean, it's pretty much a universal feeling for anyone who's ever gotten lost in a game. That pull to just keep going, to see what's over the next hill, to finally hit that next big milestone. It feels like it's coming from inside you, right? But what if I told you that feeling was put there on purpose?
Yep, that's right. This whole compulsion loop, as it's called, is not some happy accident. It is a very carefully crafted system, built on decades of psychological research, and it's all designed to keep you locked in and, well, playing.
So, here's our game plan for today. We're going to start with the actual science of behavior, then look at the carrots and sticks that game designers use to guide us. After that, we'll get into the nitty-gritty rules of rewards and uncover the ultimate psychological hook. And finally, we'll ask a pretty serious question. Is all of this just good design, or is it something else entirely?
So to really understand why games have such a powerful grip on us, we have to talk about a pretty fundamental concept from psychology.
At its core, operant conditioning is really just about learning. It's how we learn to connect our actions to their outcomes. In the world of game design, this means getting players to want to do certain things. Fight that monster, finish that quest, or even just log in every day by giving them a reward for it. And on the flip side, discouraging other actions with some form of punishment.
Okay, so let's see what that actually looks like in practice. Designers basically have two main tools in their toolbox to shape how you play. There's reinforcement, which you can think of as the carrot, and punishment, the stick.
So, reinforcement is all about giving you something good when you do what the game wants. You beat a tough boss, boom, you get a shiny new sword. Simple, right? Punishment, on the other hand, is designed to make you not want to do something. Think about those big "you died" screens or losing a bunch of valuable gear when you get taken out.
Now, here's the key thing to understand. While designers use both of these, one is just way more effective. Punishing a player can make them feel frustrated, It can make their achievements feel cheap. But rewarding them, that creates this awesome positive feedback loop that makes them feel strong and just eager to keep going. And this example from Diablo is just perfect. In the early days, not eating was a punishment. It was this annoying chore everyone hated. So what did the designers do? They flipped it. Instead of punishing you for not eating, they started rewarding you for eating. It's the exact same action, but one feels like a total drag, and the other feels like a fun bonus. Honestly, it's a brilliant little piece of design.
Okay, so we've established that rewards are super powerful, but it gets even more precise than that. Turns out, the timing of those rewards is just as important, if not more important, than the rewards themselves.
And this is where things get really scientific. Designers aren't just tossing out loot at random. They're using what are called reinforcement schedules. These are basically psychologically tuned rulebooks designed to squeeze out the maximum amount of engagement. And they mostly fall into two big categories.
The first type is interval-based, and that's all about time. You get a reward after a certain amount of time goes by. The second type is ratio-based, which is tied directly to what you do. You get a reward after you perform an action a certain number of times. But it doesn't stop there. There's another layer to this.
First up, you've got fixed schedules. These are the predictable ones. A fixed interval is that classic daily login bonus. You know for a fact you're getting something every 24 hours, which builds a really strong habit. And a fixed ratio is that super satisfying XP bar. You know exactly how many more points you need to level up, which really pushes you to just grind it out.
But then you have variable schedules. And this, my friends, is where the real magic trick happens. These rewards are totally unpredictable. You might get something based on time, but you don't know when. Or, and this is the big one, you get a reward based on your actions, but you have absolutely no idea which action is going to be the one that hits the jackpot.
So out of all these different schedules, which one is the most powerful? Which one is really responsible for that just one more round feeling we've been talking about?
This is it. Variable ratio reinforcement. It is, without a doubt, the single most effective psychological hook known to behavioral science. And it is the engine running behind the most compelling and, yeah, maybe the most addictive systems in all of modern gaming. So how in the world does this work? Well, every single time you do something with an uncertain outcome, like opening a loot box, your brain is just flooded with anticipation. See, it's not actually getting the reward that gives you the biggest high, it's the possibility of getting it. That uncertainty triggers a release of dopamine, which is the brain's feel-good chemical. It basically screams, hey, that was exciting, let's do that again. And just like that, you're in the loop.
And this chart just shows it all so clearly. With fixed, predictable rewards, you can see a player's excitement kind of goes up and down. But look at the variable rewards that create this consistently high, sustained level of engagement. And why is that? It's because the thrill never goes away. The big jackpot could always be the very next try.
This is the absolute heart of that just one more feeling. It's not just blind hope. It's that electrifying possibility that the very next match you play, the very next chest you open, the very next enemy you kill, that's going to be the one. That's going to be the one that finally drops that amazing item you've been chasing for hours.
Okay, so now we have to talk about the other side of this coin, because these tools are incredibly powerful. And with that kind of power comes a really serious ethical conversation.
On the one hand, when these reward systems are balanced just right with the player's skill, they can put you in this amazing mental state called flow. That's when you are just completely absorbed, you're perfectly challenged, and you feel totally fulfilled. It's the peak of great game design, where time just seems to disappear.
But on the other hand, when do these perfectly engineered loops cross a line? Their sheer effectiveness has led a lot of people to argue that they can feel manipulative or even exploitative, especially when you start throwing real money into the mix.
So, I'm going to leave you with this question to think about. Now that you understand the psychology behind it all, where is that line for you? At what point does a system designed to be engaging stop being a fun feature and start becoming something else? It's definitely something to chew on the next time you find yourself saying, just one more round.